Austrian cardinal has warned that many Muslims want to see an Islamic conquest of Europe and that Europe's Christian heritage is close to being lost. Christoph Schönborn was delivering a sermon at an event to commemorate the Christian victory over the Ottoman Empire. Schönborn was elevated to the rank of Cardinal in 1998, having been appointed Archbishop of Vienna in 1995. Known for his conservative views and his diplomatic skills, many see him as future Pope material. He studied under Pope Benedict XVI and is sometimes even referred to as his spiritual son. Well, to discuss his latest remarks, I can speak now to, as we look from left to right on the screens, Mohammed Shafiq, Chief Executive of the Ramadan Foundation. Oh, we've switched sides. OK, Mohammed's on the right, Chief Executive of the Ramadan Foundation. And on the left of our screens, Alexander Markovic, spokesperson for Generation Identity. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. I would like to start with you first, Mohammed. What do you think, then, of the Cardinal's apparent fears for Christianity?
Well, I think these are inflammatory comments that pander to the worst sort of prejudice that we see from not just the media and politicians, but from a supposedly Christian person. You know, the refugees that are coming from Syria fleeing persecution and violence. And at the heart of Christian faith is compassion, is providing shelter for those that are needy. And, you know, most of the people who are coming in are law-abiding citizens. They have come because they're desperate and need sanctuary. And then to describe that Muslims are somehow a third class of people that want to take over Europe is frankly absurd and offensive to many Muslims who live in Europe, who've been part of the identity of Europe for generations. Well, I think that's a question you need to put to him. It just shows you it's become fashionable to target Muslims in the media, not just by politicians and commentators, but also now by religious leaders. And everything he says runs counter to the fantastic work that His Excellency the Pope has been doing, Pope Francis has been doing, and many of the Christian leaders around the world do, which recognise that supporting refugees during their time of need is a central pillar of the Christian faith.
Alexander, over to you. What did you make of those comments?
I actually think that Cardinal Schönborn is absolutely right. Since 2014, and especially since the creation of the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, we have witnessed that Austria is actually somehow providing the fourth biggest continent of so-called jihadis or mujahideen to this part of the world. And a lot of these people also went back to Austria. And Austria is also a center of radical Islam in terms that it is a center of the Muslim Brotherhood in Graz, for example. And also that, for example, there's a King Abdullah Foundation in Vienna, which is actually a representative of the radical Wahhabism in Austria. And there's also the so-called Union of Turkish Democrats in Vienna, which is somehow a placeholder of the Islamic party AKP from Turkey and Erdogan, and they are also organizing Turkish manifestations and Islamic manifestations where actually protesters proclaim that there's currently the third Turkish siege of Vienna happening. So when Cardinal Schönborn is saying these words at the celebration of the liberation of Vienna from the Ottoman besiegers, I think he's totally right, and I was actually also very surprised that Cardinal Schönborn expressed his opinions, because in the past he was more a representative of a refugees welcome policy to Austria. And I think maybe after the terrorist attacks in Brussels and at Bataclan, but also after the rape of Cologne, which happened on New Year's Eve, I think a lot of people like Schönborn and other representatives of the Catholic Church have actually recognized that with the refugee welcome policy, they have opened the box of Pandora, and that we are now witnessing an even more harsher Islamization.
I want to come across to Mohammed now, please, if I may. He's shaking his head here.
Yes?
What do you make of those comments?
I mean, it's this sort of rhetoric that divides people when we should be looking at a time to bring people together. So we recognise that our enemy, our joint enemy of Christians and Muslims and Jews and people of no faith is ISIS. We've got to confront that ideology. We've got to confront the violence. But the inflammatory language that is used by Alexander there to tarnish every single refugee, tarnish every single Muslim who are fleeing violence and persecution from Syria and other parts of the Middle East, it's just frankly unacceptable. And I don't see, as a Muslim person, the Christian faith, which is held in high regard. Many of us Muslims live in the UK and in Europe, accept and celebrate the fact that we live in a Christian society, that there is religious freedom, that there is opportunities for Muslims to excel in various areas. But the idea that Muslims are secretly coming here to take over Europe is frankly absurd. It's not based on evidence, and it's what the far right and what the racist brigade have been peddling for so many years. And I think tonight's an example of what we see about the scaremongering that comes when it comes to Muslim issues.
Alexander, the Cardinal used the words many Muslims want to conquer Europe. Who do you think these many Muslims are? Is he referring to Islamic State, or do you think he's talking about ordinary, peaceful Muslims who are already settled in Europe?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually, because just 2 weeks before in Vienna, there was a big scandal about a Turkish businessman who actually said that the Turks in Vienna are now preparing for the third Turkish siege. And when you are asking who are actually those Muslims, and I didn't say in any time that all the Muslims in Europe want to conquer it, but when you're thinking about those 150 foreign fighters who are now in Syria and waging jihad for Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, it's actually a fact that there must be several thousand Muslims alone in Austria which are supporting those people, because otherwise they could not travel to Syria or Iraq, on the one hand. And on the other hand, there are also various studies about the attitude of the Muslims living in Austria towards our constitution, and more than 60% of the Turks in Austria, for example, who are living here, are actually saying that they put Sharia above our constitution. And there are also, a lot of Muslims who actually say that they don't respect our society, our religion. So when I see all those numbers, those figures, and when I also see all those terrorist plots happening in Austria,
it's all right-wing propaganda, sir.
Accidents.
It's all right-wing
this is not right-wing propaganda. This is
a racist and fascist ideology. It's a fascist ideology.
It's the Turkish Union of Democrats, the right-wing
he's a fascist. He's a fascist, and you,
it's the Muslim Brotherhood, a right-wing propaganda organization.
You are also part of the problem.
And I
you
think
are part of the problem.
One is talking about Mr. Sharif.
You are part of the problem, because that inflammatory language is what the problem is here. If you want to talk about what issues, what about talking about bringing people together?
On the one hand,
why don't you talk about bringing people together?
Like Mr. Sharif, who are maybe condemning also
let's try and keep the personal sides out of it. Let's get back to the Cardinal, though, because Mohammed, do you consider the Cardinal to be part of the problem? Because
this is part.
Mohammed, the Cardinal is someone who's known as being conservative. He's known as someone who conciliates arguments, brings different parties together. Why would he say something which seems quite inflammatory?
Then you actually have
Alexander,
to
if you could just give Mohammed a chance to speak,
please. Actually to a conquest of our society.
Okay, go on, Mohammed.
Well, I think what Alexander's demonstrated is that we've got a far-right agenda that he's talking about tonight. It's not based on any evidence. The vast majority of Muslims who live in Europe, who've been part of the fabric of European society for centuries, are law-abiding people who just want to get on with their life, bring their children up and have a good life. Yeah? And nobody's interested in terrorism. They're not interested in extremism. Do we have a problem with a small minority of people that are involved in that extremism and terrorism? Absolutely. Do we have to confront them? Yes. Do we support the intelligence agencies and the police to find out who they are and to protect our countries? Absolutely. And if that's what these people want to talk about, then we're actually in agreement. But what they actually want to talk about is tarnishing every single Muslim. The language they use is inflammatory. It's not based on evidence. It's based on prejudice. And, for me, the Roman Catholic Church, under the leadership of the Honourable Pope Francis has been talking about building bridges between all faiths and all communities, and that's what we should be focusing on, bringing people together.
So, Mohammed, you're praising
right-wing rhetoric.
You're praising elements
racist
of the Christian church, and so it must be extremely concerning, surely, for you to hear the comments of a man who's being touted as a possible next pope, a man who's considered pretty conservative.
Yeah, I'm really shocked that somebody as a senior leader of the Roman Catholic Church would say such a thing when the faith of any faith, whether it's Judaism, Islam or Christianity, is about bringing people together. The way the Pope has opened his door and his home to refugees has been inspiring. The way he talks about bringing faith communities together. We've got a common enemy. The common enemy is ISIS. Let's focus on that. Let's bring to get people together. And I just think it's really sad that a leader who supposedly, according to media reports, is possibly on the list to be the next Pope. I mean, if that is the way the Christian church wants to head towards, then that's a deeply worrying time for faith communities around the world.
Alexander, the Cardinal was speaking at an event which is quite significant, I think. It was to commemorate Christian forces defeating the Ottomans 333 years ago. So if you put it in the context of where he was making these comments, do you think he's suggesting, implying that Christians are facing another religious war today?
Yes, absolutely. I would say he's actually implying that we have, again, this Islamic threat for Europe on the plate. And I think it's always important to know that it's not just about radical Islam, which is threatening us, but it's also about mass migration. And radical Islam is actually just some kind of mobilization factor for all those immigrants to get the common aim. You can see it in the Turkish and the Chechen community in Austria, for example, that all of them become radicalized in kindergartens, even actually also in kindergartens and also in mosques everywhere in Austria. So,
I mean, how can you make that comment?
A lot of
you said earlier that you don't target all Muslims, and now you're saying all Muslims. Earlier on you said, I'm not talking about all Muslims. Now you're saying you're talking about all Muslims.
Are getting radicalized. And I also said...
You said all Muslims.
For example,
you said all Muslims. You said the word all Muslims. Maybe you want to withdraw that remark now. You said all Muslims. Alexander, why don't you withdraw that remark?
Supporting this agenda.
Why don't you withdraw the remark? Alexander, why don't you answer the question? You said all Muslims. Why don't you withdraw that remark by saying not all Muslims? Why say all Muslims?
I said that actually the majority of Muslims in Austria
you said all Muslims.
Sharia above our constitution.
You said all. So no, you're changing your tune now. You said all Muslims. You said all Muslims. So why don't you withdraw?
Gentlemen, I'm afraid the clock's beaten us. We're going to have to wrap up our debate this evening. You both had a good chance to give your point of view there.
Neil, that's been exposed tonight to Russia today.
The Turkish Democratic Union, and you also can't deny that we actually also have recruiters from ISIS here.
Alexander, I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap you up there. Thank you to both our guests. Alexander Markovic, spokesperson for Generation Identity there, who clearly can't hear me saying time to stop. Mohammed Shafiq, Chief Executive of the Ramadan Foundation there. Thank you, guys.
Say that there is no Islamic threat in Europe. And
Islam as a religion is a lie wrapped with some facts and truths.
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Transmit a third alarm. We'll have the staging area.